The Children's Movement of Florida is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is focused on a strong start for all children in Florida. The individual who founded this organization is David Lawrence Jr., a longtime advocate of early childhood development and a tireless proponent of making children in Florida the state's top priority for investment.
I entered journalism more or less because my father was in journalism. I so loved and admired my father that I decided to go into the same craft, the same profession that he did. We were raised on a farm. My father returned to the newspaper business. When he returned to the newspaper business, and by now we were living in Florida, um, it was an easy choice for me to say, I'm going to do journalism. And so the rest was history. I worked for 35 years at 7 newspapers as reporter, editor, or publisher. Loved what I did, got to do really interesting things. Um, Participated in journalism that made a difference in people's lives. Newspaper business was then a very significant and, yes, a powerful business, but it clearly has changed in the last, particularly the last 20 to 25 years. So I lived a life of that included being in 56 countries, some of them pretty and wealthy and so forth, and some of them tougher challenges. So I've been in every country in this hemisphere, north and south. I've also been to China and India and Singapore and much of Europe and Bangladesh and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the list goes on, and had the chance to meet and talk with every president before, during, or after his time, beginning with Richard Nixon through Joe Biden. Lived a life where my wife and I had dinner with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and interviewed Fidel Castro for 5.5 hours in Havana, and rode with the then President of the United States on Air Force One and interviewed him. So it has been a particularly interesting newspaper journalism life. So in 1996, the then governor of Florida was Lawton Childs, a particularly decent and honorable human being. Previously, he had been a United States senator. Interestingly and importantly enough, in about 1980, he had a grandchild named for him, as a matter of fact, who was a very premature baby and weighed little more than a pound at birth. Frequently, very frequently, children who are quite premature end up with significantly developmental and behavioral challenges. So Lawton Childs was very interested in the early childhood years. Those are the years, for instance, from 0 to 18 months for language development. Those are the years from 0 to 3 where 85% of brain growth occurs. Get those years right, and chances are you'll have all the years subsequently right. He asked me to lead a statewide task force on early learning, early childhood. The years, you could call them 0 to 5, 0 to 6, 0 to 8, and get all those years right, and chances are that child will have momentum all his or her life. So I was still publisher of the Miami Herald then, and I worked for 2 years on the side on this issue. I learned so much that I decided to retire and work full time on getting children off to a better start. So That led to free pre-K for all 4-year-olds in Florida. That led to the Children's Trust, which this year will spend almost $180 million in Miami-Dade County on early intervention and prevention, higher quality childcare, higher quality after school care, and many, many other programs. Uh, I decided to retire and work full time on this because I thought it spoke to the future of the United States of America. That it was simply tragic that every child didn't have a chance to fulfill his or her potential. So after the passage for the second time of the Children's Trust in 2008, after a good deal of subsequent work, the Children's Movement of Florida was founded. And so it has been in existence now for 11 years. Its focus is on making children a much higher priority for investment, both private investment and public investment. Now, it's called a movement for a reason. A movement, in my definition, is about all children. The same principles that raised my 5 children and our 7 grandchildren are the same principles of health and education and nurturing and love. All of them involve the various ways that children grow socially, emotionally, cognitively, physically, spiritually, and so forth. And so the movement is about changing the culture of how to get things done. So I had been asked over many years, when are you going to write your book? And I would always kiddingly tell people, when I get old enough. And so there wasn't really a plan to do it. Then I helped somebody with his book, a man named Mike Fernandez, who's a wonderful man who's been very, very generous to the work I do, extremely generous. And he did a very good book, and I was able to be helpful in that. It was all his words, of course. And I thought if I can do some good work for him, maybe I could do something for myself. And I was not a person who saved a lot of paper and I had a lot of notes. So I had to sort of do detective work just to tell my story. And so the book came out in September of 2018. And the book really, the thread through the book is about children. My own life growing up, journalism as it affected young people, children, and the future of this country, and then ultimately full-time energy spent on helping children get off to a better start in this world and have momentum all their lives. Ultimately, I've sold 22,000 copies. Not a nickel of that goes to me. It all goes to the children's movement. And what I hear mostly from people, this is a self-serving part of the answer, and I apologize for that, is that it's inspiring. People want to know that the basic values still work. So I'm as idealistic and optimistic at the age of 80 as I was when I was your age. When I was even 10 years old, I was optimistic and idealistic. I grew up in a family of 11, 9 children. We were expected to be good people. We were expected to try to tell the truth. We were expected to be fair. We were expected to make a difference in other people's lives. So I've had the privilege all my life of first in journalism and then subsequently in building an early childhood movement. I've had the chance to live a life of idealism and optimism. And sometimes that's a bit naive and you can get burned at times, but I'd rather get burned from time to time because you get a lot more done. if you expect that good things can be done. And if you have high expectations of people, I frequently quote the second President Bush, who talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. A lot of people have low expectations of other human beings. You get to do far more in this world if you have high expectations of other people. So this may strike folks as a naive answer, but I promise you, if you got good values at home, they're going to work your whole life. You need to believe that you have the power within yourself to make a difference. You need to understand that what so many people consider important, which is possessions of one sort or another, money, cars, homes, and the list goes on, that ultimately most of that is not that important. Surely people ought to be paid wisely, decently, and even generously. But the mark of your life is what difference did you make in other people's lives? And I'm 80, I'm not retired, have no interest in retiring, and it is not fundamentally about money. It's about there's going to come a point sooner rather than later that I'm not going to be above the planet Earth. And what difference will my life have made for other people? And the joy of life is frankly giving, sharing with other human beings. And another joy of life is learning. I read an average of at least 2 books a week, mostly history and biographies, but also good fiction and some other things. And I live a life where relationships are really important. I'll frequently ask an audience about, how do you get ahead? And somebody will talk about hard work, and somebody will talk about intellectual firepower, and somebody else will talk about focus and so forth. Ultimately, I'll say, and so frequently, you better include relationships in this. I have 5 wonderful children. They're good people, 3 of whom graduated from Ransom. They're wonderful people. But what I want them to be is, and they are, lifelong learners who make a difference in other people's lives. And so there are people who are really smart and very charismatic and so forth. I've never wanted any of my children to be too smart and too good looking, too charismatic, because you then try to fall back on those great gifts. And I've worked with lots of people who are smarter than I am and maybe quicker than I am, but I haven't been with a lot of people who work harder than I do. And ultimately, for you and for me and for all of us is, what did you get done? And what you get done is dependent not only on the gifts that you have, but your ability to build relationships. If I've been to 56 countries, I got a lot of things to talk about that might connect with other people. If I'm reading 2+ books a week, I got a lot of different ways to connect with other people. So in my own way, I've never particularly cared about money. Money has never been a central driver of my life. I've led the kind of life that I'm blessed to have led and hope to keep leading for some while to come. what I would love people to say to the degree they can, he worked hard to be fair. He was a lifelong learner. He made a difference in other people's lives. And he's a pretty good example for other people. I say all that and then add quickly, I'm flawed. All of us are flawed. I hope by lifelong learning, I'm diminished the flaws. Um, but I've led a life where I don't particularly like the words, are you happy? I'm not even quite sure I know what that means. If you ask me, do you find joy in life? I would say absolutely. It's not as though I'm living a life of constant joy, but there are great moments in my life. I've been married for almost 59 years, loved my wife more than when we were married. If my children and grandchildren and my wife are and all the family are fine, then I'm basically fine as well. I feel very blessed in so many ways.